Over the past 2 decades, technology has completely changed the way we do business. Every organisation now relies on its IT system to be effective and efficient. Finding the right system and the right implementation can radically change how a business runs for years to come. But finding the right system is a challenge itself. Over the next half hour, we will be exploring the opportunities of IT with some of Britain's leading providers.
The digitisation for us has been about two main strands, I'd say. One of them is about services. City councils are still providers of services, and where we provide services, we want to make them as efficient and as effective as possible for the people who use them. We want to make them as simple as possible. We want to make digital services so good people prefer to use them, which is a sort of government digital service mantra, which we've really adopted in Bristol as well. And what we mean by that is that whereas in the old days we might have put a web form app on the front end, and then everything behind the scenes was actually still manual. People were retyping things, or they were printing things out and handing them to other people in the team. Digitisation basically means taking every step of the process and trying to find a digital, electronic, internet-based way of doing that.
As it stands at the moment, the R&D tax relief scheme, it was introduced by the government in the year 2000, and it's something that the UK government has been really keen to promote for the last few years. In terms of the UK's position on a global basis, the UK government are really keen for the UK to maintain its position as a leader in the fields of technology and science. And a good way to do that is to encourage businesses to invest and reinvest in pushing their own boundaries. And one of the ways you can do that is through R&D tax relief. Aside from R&D tax relief itself, there's also government grants which are available, as well as some newer tax reliefs such as patent box and video games tax relief as well. And so the government has introduced these schemes to try and encourage businesses from small SMEs and startups all the way up to national and international companies as well, to try and encourage them to spend money on pushing forward these boundaries.
The company is about to release a new database platform, which is really focused on using some of the new technologies around things like for big data. It's doing some things around standards of use of Java to be able to use that across internet applications. We see that being a big growth area for us, not only in healthcare but particularly across other industries which need to have that kind of capability. We're doing a lot of work within healthcare as well. This is further expansion of what we're doing around implementation of systems support hospitals, but I think very interestingly around the integration of care across the patient journey, and actually being able to integrate patients into the care delivery team. And this is a big focus we're working on at the moment, to be able to support overall care coordination that includes patients as an active member of the care team.
Within the software industry, you'll find companies who are playing with tools and technologies that are just emerging. So one facet of software development is that the field is constantly changing. New tools, new frameworks are being created, and those frameworks are being utilized to help, for instance, web design agencies create websites, to create applications, to create ERP systems, or to create CRM systems. I mean, these frameworks are not always well established, and the great thing about people in the software industry is that they tend to take risks. There's a new framework that comes out, there's a prospect that it will cut down the work that they necessarily will have to put into a task. So immediately they take that framework and they play with it. They see how they can push it, how they can extend it, how they can really make it suitable for what they're trying to produce. They're trying to save time essentially, but they're also taking a risk in using something that's new, unproven, and in doing that, sometimes the people who develop these frameworks for these companies don't even know the best ways of using them. So these companies are frequently coming across problems. but HTML5 would be a good example. So HTML5, it's been around for a while. It's a very common standard on the web. However, it's not implemented the same way on every single browser. So on different browsers, there'll be slight differences in its usage. It's not fully standardized. So as companies are using it, they're encountering shortcomings, they're realizing there's incompatibilities that they have to try and work around. And as far as they're concerned, these workarounds, these activities are just normal day-to-day development, when in fact, those types of activities are R&D.
When we're thinking about the services that we provide to people, if you take one of the examples we've done over the last year, for instance, registering a birth or a death, there are a number of different things in that service that used to be paper-based or based on personal visits or something you did over the phone, and that would be so around booking an appointment, for instance. And you needed to do them in that way because the systems were manual in the background. When we digitise, we obviously want to run the calendaring and the appointment booking electronically. We want to give people access to that on the internet, on their smartphones, on their tablets, and we want to make the scheduling of the time with the registrars all electronic and all automated, so that you don't have to have any manual intervention.
How we think about technology has completely changed over the last 15 years. Where once computer systems simply kept records, today they can predict the future. With ever-increasing processing power, the capabilities available to us will continue to grow in the coming years.
I see that IT software has evolved an awful lot, even in the last 15 years. We look back 15 years and we see it being very focused on organisations, and it could have been very, very simple, just being helping organisations sort of record what they're doing, think about what's going on in a financials application for recording information in ledgers. Then it becomes a bit more where it's actually not just recording but documenting what's actually going on. So you're documenting things to allow you to be able to understand more about what's happened, and you can do some more reporting.
We set out to involve as many people as possible in the redesign of our services, in the belief that good service design is actually cheaper, it's better for people, and it costs less if you get it right. But in order to get it right, you have to engage with the public and you have to engage with the staff that run the services, and you get them to work together to test out what's currently going on, to design an alternative to that, and the word is iterate, to build something and test it and see if that's right, and then to tweak it and redesign it, and so that there's a whole kind of process where through a number of steps and through a number of dialogues with the public, we end up with a redesigned service. Agile essentially means that we don't try and build one big thing and then it collapses. It means that we do it in bits, in parts, and we test it, and then we go back and we test it, and we redesign and we go back. And that gives you an agile way of working, if you like.
We see maturity increasing now, where it's becoming more than just documentation, but it's becoming more of an actual helper in the way in which it works with users, helps them actually doing the job, suggesting things to them about, well, if you're doing this, how do you think about it? So in healthcare, it could be things like, well, this patient's got these set of characteristics, have you thought about doing this kind of test? Then it become more sophisticated again, really, for more than being just purely a helper. Then finally, I see it when you get some very, very sophisticated, this is sort of where it's probably going in 10 or 15 years' time, where the software becomes able to actually sort of help be a mentor, to really help people do their jobs far more effectively. So I think from an organisational side, particularly in healthcare, we see it sort of moving that way. The other big change in IT is, of course, the fact it's become so much more consumer-focused, and that's also important for healthcare. We look back 10 years ago, we weren't thinking about apps. We weren't thinking about how the consumer could actually be engaged in what they do within their healthcare. But today, that's a big change, and that's only going to increase, and that has a big impact on IT systems and what's actually required.
In today's IT environment, cloud is the big term that people talk about. People talk about hosting their applications or hosting their software in the cloud, so they don't have to have individual installed on-premise instances of that software. Instead, it's all hosted in one place, and you can access it from anywhere on any device. Now, recent advancements in technology have resulted in the ability to create your own clouds. So rather than having to rely on, say, Google or an Amazon Web Services, or to rely on a Microsoft Azure, there's actually frameworks in place now that allow you to create your own cloud. So that includes being able to establish your own virtual compute, your own virtual network, your own virtual memory. This is, individually, these are not necessarily groundbreaking elements, but together, it's the first time this has really started to happen on a major scale within the industry. So there are certain sets of tools like OpenStack, which are becoming very popular. And within R&D, whenever you're adopting a new technology or a new framework and experimenting with it, trying to get it to work, you're starting to do R&D because you're at the cutting edge. You're trying to understand how a new tool works, understand the best way of putting it together and potentially extending it and applying it to your individual scenario. And in addition, you're trying to almost make it as suited as possible to your needs.
We introduced and developed their Agile skills, which is about putting services in customers' hands really quickly so we can get feedback on those, and actually more importantly giving value back to Bristol City Council. The goal wasn't about being agile, it's using lean and agile techniques to achieve those strategic goals, i.e. the savings. I think this is huge. I think really Bristol City Council could be the exemplar for the other councils, and this is not a case of smoke and mirrors now. Bristol City Council have actually done this. And I think other councils could look at this and say, okay, how could we learn from what Bristol City Council have done and apply that to what we could do with our councils? Because austerity is hitting not just Bristol City Council, it's hitting all councils, and we need to find ways of making those savings, but without affecting frontline services. If we can achieve those two goals together, then that's huge.
It's always been difficult in a traditional software environment to evolve in a way which provides the responsiveness to change, and that's always been the big challenge in IT, particularly where you've got monolithic systems that might have 10, 15, 20 million lines of code in them, which are, the large back office systems do. And so being able to take advantage of those systems but apply that functionality, that capability in different settings is the real challenge, because you can't rapidly evolve and replace and do rip and replace on those systems every year or every 2 years, every 3 years. You have to be able to repurpose those, to wrap them up in a different way, present them in a different way, make composites of the functionality that exists around, and then rapidly surface that and present that. That's the real challenge, I think.
As technology has become so ubiquitous in our daily lives, the lines between business and personal have begun to blur. Employees now have public profiles that are linked to your business, and what they post at home can reflect on you for good or ill. It is a major challenge to develop policies that give your staff both freedom of speech and the chance to support your business.
In 2006, the Trade Union Congress described the UK's Facebook users as HR accidents waiting to happen. And the reason they described Facebook in that way is because there's a blurring between people's social lives and their professional lives, and of course Facebook is a domain for publication, and sometimes people don't realise that, but it is actually publishing onto the internet, so all sorts of issues can arise with the use of social media. Well, social media is a very useful tool for companies, and actually some companies actively encourage their employees to use social media to promote both themselves but also to promote their company. So, for example, employees are often encouraged to use LinkedIn or Twitter, and indeed, there's an emerging grey area where companies are encouraging employees to write on a company Facebook page to raise the corporate profile of the business. The difficulty with that, of course, is that employees often use it as a social networking tool, and there is a blurring of lines between one's social life and one's professional life. So one of the grey areas is where employees may write very personal comments about their colleagues or indeed their employer. And I wanted to mention a recent case of British Waterways Board and Smith. Now in that case, Mr. Smith posted onto his Facebook page the following status. He wrote, "I really hate my job," or words to that effect, and he also said he was going to be drinking alcohol. He intimated he was going to be drinking alcohol whilst on standby. Now, bearing in mind that Mr. Smith was a maintenance worker who was responsible for British waterways and canals, this, although it was intended as a joke, was taken very seriously by his employer, and indeed they relied on these two comments to dismiss him 2 years later for gross misconduct. So that shows how seriously employers can take comments that are supposedly seen as banter by employees. Now, this was tested at the Employment Tribunal, and he sued for unfair dismissal. He said, "How could this have been gross misconduct? It was banter, I was joking, of course I wasn't drinking whilst I was on standby." But the Employment Tribunal upheld the employer's view. His comments were likely to reduce the public's trust and confidence in British Waterways Board. They were derogatory comments, and trust and confidence had broken down between the parties. So the finding of gross misconduct was upheld. Employees may feel they've got an expectation of privacy when they're on Facebook, if they've set their privacy settings correctly. Unfortunately, an argument from an employee that the matters that they put onto Facebook or other forms of social media are private isn't a reasonable expectation. And we always try and educate our clients to tell their employees that anything you put on social media is a form of publication. It is not the same as sending a private email or a letter to somebody. It's just not. It's publishing. So you cannot then complain if your employer relies on something they see on Facebook about you, if you have indeed posted those comments or those photos or whatever it may be. Employees really need to take care.
For many years, IT systems were kept behind the scenes and only interacted with by internal staff. This ensured security, but also created inefficiency. Today, we expect an IT system to be public-facing and able to handle data input automatically while remaining safe and secure.
I think what we're seeing is that there's a major shift in the role of IT away from not just providing the back-end services and administration for organisations, not just providing support for complex processes, whether it's clinical decision support in healthcare or trading in financial services. Well, I think what we're seeing now is that IT is very much being driven to the forefront of people's lives. So simple to access, easy to use, rapidly responsive devices which are connected to complex systems in the back end that are transparent to those users is creating a real sort of shift in the way in which IT is being surfaced and being used, and that is then placing new demands on the providers of those IT systems to be able to cater to an environment which is much more demanding in some ways, much more rapidly moving, has very different use cases, very different requirements to meet.
Service design thinking, really, you start out with what is it that people are trying to do, what is it that they're trying to experience, and what are all the touch points with a service that they might actually engage with, interact with. And so, for instance, if you're looking at somebody's experience of losing a job, there are a number of different services that they might need to interact with in Bristol. But actually what you're doing with service design thinking is you're thinking about it from the perspective of the person. What's their life, what's happening in their life, what sort of journey are they going through? And you're recognising that you as an organisation, your processes actually appear in that person's life in various points, rather than them actually having to conform to your processes. It kind of flips your thinking around from the traditional analysis and design, which starts inside the organisation and kind of goes inside out, and you start thinking about your customers as they appear in your processes, and you realise that actually you're appearing in their life, not the other way around. And so you start thinking outside in. You start from the citizen, the customer, and you think about their experience, and you can then trace through how they experience that kind of that episode of whatever it is in their life, whether it's losing a job or having a baby or moving to a new place. And you think about the various different elements of that experience. So for us, obviously, we would be, if it was something around losing a job, let's say, you'd be thinking about things like housing benefits and the various services like that, and you start to trace through what people might expect to experience. And then you start to work through the kind of, as I say, the touch points, which are not just the digital ones, but also the physical ones. The experience of what the letters are like, for instance, the experience of what the kind of materials like that communicates how to get help and where you can go. And that might not appear necessarily from the councils, but it might appear from a citizens advice bureau, or it might appear from a poster in your supermarket, or it might appear from something in the GP. So there's a whole variety of different places that people might experience the service. So one of the things that we've taken out of this whole service design thinking approach is really, as I say, this kind of outside-in thinking, this real getting close to what people need from a service, and we've used that to go out and do user research, and that user research has then helped us to understand what people's needs are for a service, rather than maybe our perspective of what the requirements ought to be for a service.
There's really three types of barrier, I think, to that. One is that there's a vast estate of complex systems already present. So if you're looking to introduce new technology that replaces those solutions which are complex, where there's sometimes baroque processes baked into the way the hospital or whatever is working, that the clinicians are used to using, that the staff are used to using, moving that to an alternative paradigm of way of working is hard. Migrating data is hard. Changing those systems from one to another is a hard thing to do. And particularly if you're saying, okay, well, you've got 123 systems doing different things, we want to replace those with one or two, that becomes a very difficult project, a very complex project to manage. And it's less of an IT problem, more of a social engineering problem within the institution to manage the way that institution is working, because traditionally you've got lots of independence from the clinicians. They're very in the NHS. They're very powerful people. They make their own decisions as to how they want to work. So it can be very difficult for a healthcare institution to evolve its technology estate.
Embracing the potential of IT systems can lead to huge changes in culture. With accurate data available in real time, decisions can be made faster than ever imagined, making your business faster and more responsive. Simply by finding the right system, you can unlock the potential in your company.
If you go back to before Radtac came and joined us, we were taking something like a year or longer from when we first got the idea of, hey, we want to do a residence parking service, to a residence parking service being online and delivered. That was a period of, say, like 12 months. So when Radtac joined, started putting in the measurements of how long is it actually taking you from when you first started working on something to something being live, moved us to bringing that down from 12 months to more closer to 3 months or under 3 months. So you kind of set a target of, actually, let's work towards getting things from initial idea to live in 3 months. And actually we were able to, in some cases, get that under 3 months, and that in itself is a huge change for us, and something that we need to build on, because we're not there yet, but we are definitely moving in the right direction. But we can get faster, and that is another thing that I think Radtac kind of re-instilled in me. I think when I was younger, I kind of always had this sense of urgency, and then over a period of time, you kind of get embedded in an organisation, and you just get that kind of organisation way of doing things. and then spending some time looking at the world through a different lens, it kind of re-gave me that sense of urgency to actually really want to make a change, really want to make a difference, and actually not being satisfied with just the way that things are going at the moment. So that was just like a reawakening almost, which sounds a little bit kind of like utopian and kind of extreme, but it actually is a fundamental change from the way you used to do things to the way you do things now.
And information exchange is really the idea that you can exchange information between different systems which are supporting the work of these different professionals, an electronic patient record. And what, with these electronic patient records becoming increasingly sophisticated, what we're finding is that the people using these systems want to stay in these systems, so they want to have the information from other systems basically piped to them so they show up in their own systems. So that whole idea of information exchange is very important, and that's where we need sort of standards to allow us to be able to know that we're going to this system here, we know that we can send it in this way and it can consume it. And interoperability is really important because interoperability is different from integration. Integration just means that you can put information into a system and it can sit there. Interoperability means that that system can actually understand the information that's been put in there and can do something with it, can reason on it. So interoperability is a kind of a higher level than integration, but it's really important to be able to coordinate that care.
Some of the work that we've been focusing on when we've been adopting Agile has been about building teams and empowering those teams to be able to work and be self-organising. So something that we've seen a big kind of positive difference in for our guys has been that those project teams are really empowered to make the decisions themselves, to take things forward in a way that kind of makes sense to them, and that means that we can deliver things iteratively, and instead of people kind of going away and maybe following some of the more traditional sort of Prince 2 approaches, where you'd sort of be much more waterfall or things would be happening behind the scenes and there'd be a big bang launch. The guys actually are iteratively releasing things, testing how they go, learning, and that means that we can work at pace, but we can also do just enough. So I think sometimes it can be a temptation when you start a big project to want to do absolutely everything, but actually sometimes 3 of the 10 things you wanted to do kind of achieve the difference and make the changes that you want, and you can stop and then move on to the next thing. So that's been something that's been really important for us.
For us, this is a rapid growth period for us. We grew out of the recession, and our growth aims are to double our business in the next year and continue that level of growth for the following 2, 3, 4 years. That's a strategic plan that the company has. We intend to do that by offering this complete solution across sectors that we work in, that is from the C-suite, where we might do some executive coaching as well as look at cultural change, all the way through to how are the individual teams delivering and developing that value into the customer.